Today, Dr. Melanie Burton, a forensic and counseling psychologist, clinical social worker, and licensed addictions counselor, brings you one step closer to a new you, where you feel empowered and on a positive path to growth and well-being. As a solutions-focused therapist, Dr. Melanie Burton can help you live a life worth celebrating by unearthing those long-standing behavior patterns and perceptions that may be holding you back. And now, here's your host, Dr. Melanie Burton.
Hi, everybody. We had some technical issues, but we're really happy to have everyone here today. I'd like to introduce my guest, Mr. David Benson. So let me tell you a little bit about David. His dream is to create a consulting and mental relaxation clinic, also using his skills at inducing progressive relaxation through simple hypnotic verbal inductions and presentation of suggestions, which subjects will find inclusively adapted within their daily lives for calming and recentering. David is also a practitioner of Genius Insight applications, which use frequencies similar to Rife's to center the expenditure of bodily energies within the chakra centers by making analysis within an algorithm based upon scans done by subjects' voice, reciting their names and vowels, as well as from a recent photograph. He does not need to perform the collection of required data in person, but can use an application found at his website, www.insightbiofeedback.com. All right, David, welcome.
Thank you.
So you have quite a history. I don't know where you want to begin. If you want to talk more, if you want to start by talking more about the work that you do, or if you want to tell us more about your history.
Okay, well, I am retired, and when a friend of mine came up and announced that there was going to be some humanitarian projects presented to Q, that I might submit this project, which you read, and I posted that project to a response to the Q inquiry to do an interview with Q on this same network. Okay, so my training was back in 1978 and 79 at the International College of Hypnosis Studies in Miami, Florida, while I was still active duty in the U.S. Air Force station at Homestead Air Force Base. So it was just a simple 20-mile ride from home to the college campus, which was Dr. Shrout's psychology clinic in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
We studied Monday through Thursday night, 6 to 10 o'clock at night. And then I got interrupted to learn how to make money his way back in March of 79 because the Air Force said, you need to go to this Tactical Air Command NCO Academy out in Texas. So I was on a path to being a career enlisted airman, and I interrupted that studies, but I also acquired some skills. And while I was at the academy, I would use the progressive relaxation technique for classmates that had not been in an academic situation for, let's say, 7 to 10 years. Most of them were in their early 30s, like myself at the time. And their instructors Well, I approached the instructors of the class and I said, you guys are giving us information, so we agree with garbage in and garbage out. But you have a certain percentage of NCOs that are failing their test. I'll work with them and see if just relaxing them will take the fear of being tested academically away, and they'll produce the answers from the material that the instructors gave them during their class time. And it worked out. 80 to 85% of those students passed and graduated. And I was given a little Esprit de Corps award plaque from my classmates during that.
That's amazing.
Oh, it was. It was a nice honor. I've never used it commercially. The only other time, again, that I used it was when I was stationed in Okinawa, and I was hanging out with a bunch of Army and Navy linguists, and they were listening to all the chatter coming into Okinawa from China, and some was Russian, some was Chinese, and probably some Korean, but this was their job. And I met them at the rec center because my career field was a veterinary technician doing food inspection down in Makamanado. And this was closer to Kadena Air Base, where I went to this rec center because I was living off base at the time, and it was just 3-block walk to go to that place. So we were doing an Agatha Christie play in the rec center, and it was opening night, and I was the inspector, and I had a policeman that was my straight man, and he come down with the flu, and the play director was E6. That's the sergeant first class in the Army. And I told him, I said, look, I'm going to take him into the band room and I'm going to try some hypnosis on him and see if we can't get his peristalsis settled down, because he was throwing up and having diarrhea and just in a mess. And the show couldn't go on. We had no understudies. So
Wow.
I was able to calm him down, and it went from the narrative, and it went into his mental side, and then it went into the tissue and the muscle memory, and we went through the play just super. And even I think we had another production, and 2 days later that he was able to go through without me doing anything with him. But yeah, the Army did not like their top secret security clearance people undergoing any sort of hypnosis by a non-approved source, let's say. So that just brought me out of the service. I cross-trained. I went into computer operator field, and I'd already had a prior to going to this College of Hypnosis Studies. I came down with what's called clinical depression. And so after I returned to service, having been treated for that, and it more or less went away on its own. It was just good nutrition, and I can't say there was medication with it, but you join talk groups and whatnot under a clinical type of treatment in a Air Force facility with doctors and medics and whatnot. So you're put in with a mixed group of people that had mental problems. And I wanted to learn more about what made my mind tick. Was I taking suggestion? Was I giving myself bad suggestions? how did I drive myself into this clinical depression? So when this announcement came up and caught my attention that Dr. Shrout was looking to set up a new class, you thought that he was going to be joining a priesthood, because the man actually was an ex-Jesuit priest who was a missionary in Ecuador. He got his training in psychology before he became a priest up in Toronto, Canada. And then when he fell in love with his Ecuadorian counterpart, married her, of course, he left the church as a priest, and he went back to Toronto and got his PhD in psychology. And because she spoke Spanish and he could speak Spanish and English very well, they moved to Miami, Florida. And so while I was going to school with him, I found out that he had 2 daughters, and he had 3 other clinicians that were psychologists working in his clinic daytime. So I learned that there was a possibility that not only was I gone through the chronic depression, that I might be vulnerable to the manic or bipolar side.
Mm.
That was one of the reasons that the Air Force let me go about 4 years later, is that I had a manic type of episode.
Oh, so you had bipolar 1 disorder.
Oh yeah. But I've never had the what can I say? I've never been arrested. I've never caused a public disturbance with it. More or less, I would keep doing my daily PR, especially after it. And of course, they pumped me full of lithium, and but after about 15 years of that, I cut that out cold turkey. I just quit it, and but it's something else that came into my mind because experiences that I've had prior to even the chronic depression. It's like memories about things. And I had a father who was an engineer and an inventor, and he loved numbers, but his training was in ornamental horticulture. But he became a B-24 bomber pilot in World War II. And then after the war, he stayed in the material handling sales industry that was supporting Department of Defense with running gear for trailers that moved equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And but I've always had in the back of my head, well, how did I find spiritually? How did I find this man to be my dad, and the woman to be my mother? They were both World War II veterans, and I always thought, well, maybe I was an ET, and I came into this crazy world during the World War II, and I spotted these people, so I just waited my turn. I mean, I have a older sister. She was the first child, and I have a younger brother. But one of the remarkable things that I did as a youngster is, with Dad's interest in the Air Force, even though he got out, was to go to these open houses. And the Air National Guard of Bridgeport, Connecticut, had the Sabre jet, the F-86, on display. And I climbed up and sat in that cockpit, and they heard me say, "This thing is so fundamental, I cannot believe it's safe." Now, where does a 4 to 5 year old come out with such profound thoughts. All right. And then later on in life, I went through an experience in Turkey that we were putting down a sentry dog, and my job was to close the vein off so that the veterinarian could inject the euthanasia agent. And they already used barbiturates in this dog's dog food to calm him down so somebody could handle the dog, because
Well, why were they putting the dog down?
he was 10 years old, or 10 to 11 years old, and the military has a policy where these dogs will usually work them only 10 years, and it's very seldom that they will have a handler in a sentry dog. Now, a sentry dog is different from a drug dog, even though they're both are of the German Shepherd lines. And they have bomb dogs that are not even German Shepherds, okay? But at that time, for a sentry dog, he was a working dog, and he was a one-man dog that usually, if a handler would rotate out, 4 years of service was the typical enlistment, then they would have to find another handler to work that dog. If the dog was, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years old when the first handler got him, the second handler would literally, to bond with the dog, they would have to masturbate the dog.
What?
Well, yes, that's correct.
I never heard of such a thing.
I haven't. And the Navy uses that same technique in training dolphins to do special work with the Navy divers. It's crazy, but it's a sexual bonding, and it's something that you can get verified, but you're going to have to talk to a canine handler that's been in the military, and so anyhow, I'm in the kennel with the dog. They've given him his euthanasia shot, and I'm kind of squatted down. I got my left knee over this dog's neck, and I was using my right hand and the finger to touch the eyelid, because in surgery with an animal, you lose the pedal reflex. You pinch between the paws, between the toes and the paws, and if the dog pulls away, they're not deep enough under the anesthetic yet. But if they lose this reflex, then you're going to lose them real quick. All right. So I was waiting for this dog, call him Duke, to lose his ocular blinking reflex. And when he did, I started to take pressure off of his neck and try to stand up. And at the same time, his head was coming up and his jaws went open. And I just remember jumping straight up, kicking sideways with both my legs. And next thing I know, I am out on the alleyway between the kennels, because they use that to carry their dog food and such stuff. But at the time of putting this dog down, there was canine handlers out there, and another veterinary technician was out there watching and observing. I don't know how I got behind those people without knocking them over, but it was almost to me like, wow, was that telekinesis? When I panicked, and the only thing I know is I was going straight up and kicking cyclone fencing on my left and my right, and projecting, I wanted to be out of that kennel. That was the last thing in my mind. And I turned around and boom. So when I left Turkey and left that group that usually send you off, bon voyage, and have a party and make a cake, and they put on the cake, Goulet, Deli Dave. which meant bye-bye, Crazy Dave. They wouldn't talk about that incident. And so I let that go, transpire. And later on, this is right after my studying in hypnosis, they had me TDY to Key West Naval Air Station. And at that time, I was getting interested in, or just prior to it, parapsychology, and going to a night school class at, Miami-Dade Junior College. I had one of these non-credit night school type classes, for that. And just getting a feel of what these people were, talking about. But anyhow, I'm now down in Key West, TDY to the Navy to do food inspection in their commissary because they rotated out the Air Force staff sergeant that was assigned to that position. And we had more office workers, veterinary technicians at Homestead Air Force Base. So they sent me to Key West. And I was rummaging around town and decided to go to the Ramada Inn. And I only had, this is October, and the fiscal year for the military would restart in October. So we hadn't got our paychecks yet because Congress was holding everything up. And I had maybe, I was married, had maybe $3 or $4 in my pocket. So I was seeing how well I could bum drinks in the hotel, and didn't do too bad. But it got to be about 1:30 in the morning, and I went back out to my Honda motorcycle, and it wouldn't start. So I walked back into the hotel, and I called Shore Patrol, and Shore Patrol said, "This is not an emergency, Sarge. We can't come and get you." So, because I was barracked at Boca Chica, not on the Key West, it's the next key up. And so, anyhow, I walked back into the hotel, and I go to the front desk, and I said, "Y'all, I'm kind of stuck here, stranded. Do you think it'd be all right if I took a chair and snoozed in the janitor's closet until morning?" And the hotel manager overheard this, and she said, "Hell no." And I said, "All right." So I went back downstairs at the lower bar level, which was ground floor, and a bar back was down there. And I told him my story. And he said, "Well, look, go out there on the veranda. There's some tables stacked up and chairs sitting in those chairs, and just go to sleep in the chairs." So I went out there, but I kind of got skittish, saying, "Oh man, I'm out here in the open. I would get caught anyhow." So a young woman walked by, and I said, "Hello." I said, "You wouldn't let a stranger sleep on the floor in your rented room, would you?" "Oh no, I can't do that." And she went off. And immediately I said, "Boy, I really blew it that time." She's going to complain management, So I got into chairs. I did my progressive relaxation, and I just added the Lord's Prayer to the end of it, and I'm gone. I start hearing voices sometime later, and then I hear another voice, and that voice told me that if I open my eyes to see them, that they would be able to see me. And I kind of said, I'm keeping my eyes closed. And so dawn's early light happened, and I finally, opened my eyes and nobody was around. I went into the men's room in that lower bar area. It was open, threw water in my face, get the sleep out, and went outside and took the cover off the motorcycle and kicked it off the kickstand and started pushing it towards the Navy commissary down the road. Found a guy that was still up early in the morning reading in his den. And so I knocked on the door, and I was tired pushing his bike. Hey, can I leave the bike in your driveway? He said, fine. And I said, I'll be back for it. And I walked off to work, and I found a truck driver that had a lift on the back trailer. And noontime, we went back and picked the motorcycle up. I got a new battery for it. I had a Sears charge card. That was a good thing. And that evening, I went back to thank the bar back. And I just get the bike off the stands, and around the corner comes that female night manager the night before. And she was just hot as mad as could be. And she said, where the hell were you last night? I said, what do you mean? We searched all over for you and could not find you. And I said, lady, if you don't know, I don't know either. And I didn't know. I woke up the same place I went to sleep. All right. Later on, I go back to Miami and I tell Dr. Shroud, my mentor, right? My instructor in hypnosis. And I said, hey, doc, this is my story. I'm sticking to it. What do you think? He says, well, the only thing I know is you were protected from above. I said, okay. You know, I got no memory. It was like once I checked out, totally relaxed, and went to what we would call your safe place mentally. That was the only memory until I heard the voices, external voices, and then I heard the internal voice saying, if you open your eyes to see them, they will see you. Okay. That's it. So let's go to Okinawa, and then let's come back. Nothing really happened extraordinary in Okinawa. That was an 18-month assignment. I did get divorced from my wife after I came back because I did not take her or the children there. She just did not have an affinity for Asian people, expressed to me while we were at Homestead Air Force Base because we were living on base housing and had numerous mixed marriages amongst the American GIs with Asian women. And I said, well, I'm not gonna carry her as an ambassador, to Okinawa. And so I went to my tech school in Keesler to learn computer operator. Got assigned to Site C6 at Eglin Air Force Base. And I had a roommate that was a staff sergeant that he got into drugs, and I was a tech sergeant with a line number for master, and he went TDY, and I called the OSI. I said, will you please check out this funny looking tobacco my roommates got stashed in the cabin that we're renting? And so they said, hey, well, that's not tobacco, Sarge, that's marijuana. And they said, would you like to leave and go to another duty station? Because I think you got yourself into a group of youngsters that might have repercussions. And I said, no, I'm not one to run from a fight, but I'll look for other housing. And so I found a fellow on, let's see, it's Santa Rosa Island there in Fort Walton Beach. It's wall-to-wall condos now with resorts. It wasn't back then. You had open access to the Gulf. We lived right across the street from it. But this young man was a Vietnam veteran. He was a soldier of fortune. He was very suicidal. And I'm going to myself, what am I getting myself into?
Jeez.
And so one day in May, I saw him. I woke up in the morning this weekend, and he was going through a fifth of bourbon. And I'm going, oh, that darn fool. He's going to go out in the Gulf. We had a storm the night before. He's going to go out in the Gulf, and he's going to try to drown himself. And so I knew enough that, nothing I could do physically could, change his mind. But I didn't know what I could do mentally. And I had been studying the book called A Course in Miracles. Don't know if you're familiar with that or not.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Helen Schuckman, back in the late 60s, she was a psychiatrist, NYU, and another clinical psychiatrist that worked at NYU also helped her. She would get the downloads, and then he would transcribe them as she would tell him about the downloads that she got. And it kind of brought to a realization that there is more to our physical life than we are really raised to become aware about.
Mm-hmm.
And miracles are a product of love. And so I was making up in my mind that, okay, there is a group, let's call it of spiritual beings that I'll call Christ ship, meaning that Jesus was not the only Christed individual or entity within God's creation of life. He was one that's well known to us, but he was not the only one, because the word Christed was a word invented to try to describe the magnificence of what that man did while he walked this earth. So I went out into the Gulf before this guy was going to do what he was set to do. And I swam out through the waves, because I was a very good swimmer at that age, and laid there in the water. And I just simply said, brothers and sisters, there's a fool going to come into this water today, and he's going to try to drown himself. And you know who I'm talking about. He's my roommate. So when he's down, push him up. And when he's up, push him out. Thank you very much. Short and sweet. And I got out of the water and I jogged as far away from that locale as I could, because I did not want to be seen and confronted by this man when he came into the water. Later on that evening, he ran into me and he said, David, what the hell did you do today? I said, Ken, what do you mean, what the hell did I do today? He said, I went into the Gulf to drown myself. I said, yeah? He said, yeah. And every time I went down, I heard your voice say, push him up. And when I was up, I heard your voice say, push him out. And I said, Ken, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I was going to deny it to him. I think what I was, and I didn't understand. Look, I thought I was giving my intention of his well-being to another group of beings. All right. They were, let's say they were imagined in my mind. Okay. But that's what my understanding was at that time. And it's like a double whammy. It's like, wow, you can set your intentions. You and everybody else has energy about themselves that is very sovereign. It's very innate. It was given to us, my belief, when we were created. And it is something in our consciousness that, yeah, we can make mistakes and screw with our physicality, but we really, this part of us stays intact. And so then that resulted in me getting booted out of the room that I was renting from him. And there was another man in that, like a ranch house that had two apartments in it, and John Workman, I forget what John did for a living, but he lived next door, and he said, "Yeah, you can bunk here for a short while." And so for about 2 weeks, I stayed with him. And during that time, at the end of May, we had the Falkland Island incident. And so when that was going on, I mean, I was at a radar site, and our job was to track with the computers any Russian launch that would go through a 10,000 square mile over Colombia. And it usually would enter that window and be out of it in 3 minutes. So that was my busy day. It was learning how to operate the computers that did all that tracking. And I had no knowledge about what was there, how fast it was going, or where it went. And it was just my job was to maintain the computers that was logging the information. Then you pass that on to an officer that did the analysis, and he would pass it on to Cheyenne Mountain and NORAD out in Colorado so that they could continue to see which way this satellite was going, if it changed direction, changed orbits. So anyhow, I start learning about, well, the British are headed for the Falkland Islands, and they're going down there with some heavy military equipment. And one thing I did not want to see at the time was a nuclear accident. And I had a classmate from my hypnosis college, Maria Elena de Sol, was from El Salvador. Her mother was German. Her father was Spanish. That's how she got the Spanish last name. And she had moved to Argentina. And so I'm saying, well, my dad had invented a fishing float called the Saturn Bobber. And it was a unique float. I don't know if you know what a bobber is or not for freshwater fishing. It's a float you attach to your line that gives you an indication if you
Oh,
get
yeah. My
yeah.
dad used to fish. Yeah.
Okay. So this, I should have dug one out. There's one in the house here somewhere, but it's two spheres put together, and each side of the sphere has a ring that, like a flywheel, so to speak, attached to the sphere. But in the centers where these spheres lock together are little fingers, and he had holes put in the rings, so you put your hook from the outside through the inside, and then you snap your line in between those fingers, and it'll hold that weight and your hook at a certain length from the float. So if you're in a flat John boat, you can go ahead and fish 20 feet deep if you want to, but you're not going to cast your line out with 20 feet of line from hook to bobber. You got to wrap the line around those rings in the center, and now everything's dangling 6 inches off, let's say, your rod tip, and you can cast it out, and it'll unspool, and your bobber will sit there in the water and float. And if you get a strike and you set the hook, the line pops out of the clothespins that are between the rings, but the hole that the line went in through the bobber lets that bobber float all the way down to the shot, or almost to the mouth of the fish that you're going to catch. So quite unique. And he sent me a couple copies of that when I was in Vietnam, and I took some to Australia, but the Australians don't do around Sydney freshwater fishing. They needed a heavier, larger float of a different kind. But I had some with me at Fort Walton Beach. And so I just made a suggestion. Now, I don't know if you have frequented yourself with anybody that is a medium or a psychic.
Yeah, we've had mediums and psychics on this show as well.
Yeah, okay. So I took a 6-pack out and put it in the intercoastal waterway. And I said, you guys take off and you go to Argentina and you prevent a nuclear accident. And I just let it go. Now, after I got out of the Air Force, it was September of 82, sometime in March, maybe of 83. I'm still on my American Indian, or Native American spirituality. And I met up with a group in Charlotte called the Brigade of Light. And Marion Starnes was a well-known psychic, lived out off of West Boulevard out near the airport in town on a old farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I visited out there pretty frequently, and we did sweat lodges, and we did a retreat up in the Roan Mountains of Tennessee, up beyond Boone and on into Mountain City area. But I walked by Marion one day, and unsolicited, she said, "You know those UFOs you sent to Argentina? Well, they got intercepted." And I just let it go off the top of my head like water off a duck, saying to myself, "What the hell? How did you know about that?" This is my internal dialogue. And so I'm sitting there between a rock and a hard place, saying to myself, well, have I really got a spiritual connection to that thought of having been an extraterrestrial soul coming into this crazy world in the late 1930s, experienced everything through World War II, found parents because whether I couldn't go home to where my original galactic family was located, or I had contracted for a mission. I do not know yet, but these were things that were, going through my mind. And later, about two or 3 years ago, I meet a young man here in Charlotte who, his name is James Rink, and James produces a Super Soldier Talk on YouTube. And this is a group of young men.
When was this? And Dave, I'm gonna have to let you know. I have a ton of questions, right?
Okay.
And we only have a few minutes left.
All right.
So I'm not sure how you want to spend the next few minutes, but because I have so many questions, I would like you to come back to do a second show.
Okay. All right. But what I'm leading up to is that the group of youngsters that were abducted by Mill Labs in the 70s, and some were even in the 60s, but through the 80s and 90s are starting to get their memories back at 2011 through present. And they truly believe that they were taken off world and served in what they call 20 backs, and meaning that their consciousness soul was snatched out of their human body, taken aboard an alien ship, or they believe that possibly it's the Fourth Reich of the Nazis that left Europe in World War II, went to Argentina and Antarctica. And so they are looking for ways to deal with their memories. And I'm thinking with my skill in hypnosis that I might be able to apply some techniques with progressive relaxation to, first off, let's give them a safe place and take away the fear and the anxiety that they're having, and then find them some quantum healing technicians that are doing a specialized type of regression hypnosis to work with them. So that is one of the areas that I want to go into. And
yes,
I've been to two of the Journey to Truth conferences in Grafton, Illinois. The first was dedicated to secret space programs. And the second one was more or less dedicated to experiencers, not necessarily that they were secret space program people, but that they were people who have experienced altered states of consciousness. And I have experienced that. I haven't told you about those yet, but those are things that can be verified. And that's where I want to go slowly, and maybe I'll find somebody in this area that I can work with in doing this. I'm 76 years old, retired, limited income. So when I heard about the humanitarian project and it can be funded, that was why I think I'm qualified to enter into this type of a work with some of the training that I've had from the International College of Hypnosis Studies.
Yeah, I would think so. I'm going to do some research on it, but I'm sure you're qualified.
And have you signed up for a humanitarian project with Q?
I never heard about it until you mentioned it. They're telling me I have 5 minutes left. I never heard about it until you mentioned it. So what I'll do is I'll do my research and I'll look into it, and we can talk more about it when I see you again.
All right. Maybe I'll
So
get that fixed on the laptop.
I think I made the mistake because you were ready to use your phone. Okay. You were all set to use your phone, and I said, no, Dave, use a computer. And then you ended up having glitches, and as soon as you got on the phone, here you were.
All right. So I have been to New York City to a Broadway show, and the man had your last name in it.
Burton, yeah.
Yeah, my grandma.
I used to tell people I was related to LeVar Burton from Roots.
Okay. Yeah. And
But
then I've been a man from La Mancha downtown New York City too.
where?
Man from La Mancha.
Okay.
Okay. It was Broadway play. Yeah. This grandmother was a very heavy set woman, and she lived with us when I was in high school in New Jersey. And I would take her into the city to see her brother. And she would treat me to Broadway shows. And I would get an excuse from school. So I was double happy.
You were really, really lucky.
Yes.
Okay, Dave. So they're telling me I got 2 minutes left. So the next show is on August 30th. So
All right.
let's do part 2 of your interview. And that way I can get all my answers in, my questions in.
All right.
And you can tell us more about your story and your experiences as well.
Good.
Because I really want to dig into, more into the work that you've done.
Great.
And most of all, thank you for your service.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, so I look forward to seeing you on August 30th, same time, same place.
All right.
Use your phone.
All right. We'll be there. You have a good
Dave.
Yep.
You too. Pleasure meeting you. I
And
look
you.
forward to seeing you again.